Coming up, the conference championship games are set after some thrilling divisional playoff matchups. This is Locked On Game to Game NFL.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are listening to Locked On Game to Game NFL, local experts taking you from game to game in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. I am your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Jaguars and Chiefs played a pretty tight one, but the Jags' good luck ultimately came to an end. Locked On Jaguars goes over a solid finish to the season for Jacksonville. Locked On Chiefs talks about the AFC Championship game and also Patrick Mahomes battling through injury.
Valiant effort in Arrowhead, but the Jaguars fall short. I'm Tony Wiggins with Locked On Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars put up a valiant effort and lose 27-20 in Kansas City. Seemed like they were doing exactly what the Jaguars do. They were playing, keeping it close, and then all of a sudden getting a lot of momentum at the end. A Trevor Lawrence pass to Jamal Agnew was fumbled on the 4-yard line of Kansas City, which pretty much thwarted any comeback attempts the Jaguars had because a touchdown at that point would have cut it to 3. The Jacksonville Jaguars had a great season, but this magnifies and shows you that there's nothing like having superior talent. Chris Jones, Travis Kelce, and of course Patrick Mahomes led their team to victory today. It's a lot of fun in the future for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but just not today. I'm Tony Wiggins with the Locked On Jaguars podcast. Make sure you check us out wherever you get your podcasts. It's your team every day.
The Kansas City Chiefs will play in their 5th consecutive AFC Championship game this year after bumping off the hot Jacksonville Jaguars in the divisional game. I'm Ryan Tracy from Locked On Chiefs, and this is what it comes down to. Patrick Mahomes is virtually unstoppable. I'm calling this the Terminator game because he looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger coming back from that ankle injury that we are going to have follow-up on, whether it's an MRI, and to see the severity of this high ankle sprain, as we're calling it right now. More to follow on that. We'll have it all this week at Locked On Chiefs. But this is a team that rallied around the backup quarterback, the running backs, the defense. Everyone stood up in the absence of Patrick Mahomes, albeit for a very short time, because he was able to muscle through that. Jaguars put up a valiant fight, but it is on to the AFC Championship game for the Kansas City Chiefs. They don't know the opponent as of right now. It could be at home against the Bengals. It could be away against the Bills. We'll call it neutral, whatever. We'll talk about it all on Locked On Chiefs, your team every day.
The NFC East divisional rivals met up in the divisional round, but it wasn't very close. Philly flexed their muscles in a blowout win. Locked On Giants goes over the end of their season. Locked On Eagles celebrating the win and looking ahead to the NFC Championship game.
The New York Giants were no match for the Philadelphia Eagles, who ended the Giants' improbable playoff run with a 38-7 dominating performance at Lincoln Financial Field. The Eagles jumped out to a 28-0 halftime lead after scoring on 4 of their first 5 possessions. The Giants defense simply had no answers for quarterback Jalen Hurts and company as Philadelphia racked up 258 yards of offense alone in the first half in just over 20 minutes of possession. The Giants were so grossly overmatched this week, reminiscent almost of Week 14 when the Eagles blew their doors off at MetLife Stadium 48-22. New York went 3 and out on 4 of their first 6 drives. They also had an interception ending a drive after 2 plays early in the game and gave up the ball on downs on their very first drive of the game. The Giants' best drive came in the third quarter, a 10-play, 88-yard scoring drive that resulted in their lone score of the game, an 8-yard touchdown run by running back Matt Breida. With the Giants now eliminated from the postseason, general manager Joe Schoen and head coach Brian Daboll will no doubt get straight to work on beefing up a roster that, while it went much farther than anyone thought it would, still has a lot of holes and a lot of areas that need to be fortified ahead of next season.
Wow. The Philadelphia Eagles are headed to the 2022 NFC Championship game. After a 38-7 win over the New York Giants in the divisional round of the playoffs, I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. 38-7, that might sound familiar. Well, that's because 5 years ago on the day, the Eagles beat the Minnesota Vikings in the 2017 NFC Championship game, 38-7. It's incredible that 5 years later, their next recent most most recent home win in the playoffs comes in the same exact way. The final score, 38-7. There's so many takeaways from this game. Jalen Hurts coming back, the offense not skipping a beat, him throwing 2 touchdowns, the defense getting to Daniel Jones all game long, the secondary being on complete lockdown. But I think the biggest story of this game was the Eagles' running attack. Lane Johnson comes back with a torn adduct and looked as elite as he did before the injury. Jason Kelsey, Landon Dickerson, Isaac Seumalo, Jordan Mailata completely dominated a pretty talented Giants defensive line with Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Azeez Ojulari, and Kayvon Thibodeau. Kenneth Gainwell, over 100 yards rushing. Miles Sanders, 90 yards rushing. Boston Scott and Jalen Hurts, both almost 70 yards rushing combined. They put on a clinic on the ground. The playoffs continue to run through Philadelphia. It has been such a whirlwind of the past 4 hours, but it's been an absolute party. The Eagles are 1 win away from going to the Super Bowl. I'm Louis DiBiase. Enjoy the night. This is Locked On Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The defending AFC champs not ready to go home just yet. They came out on top in a snowy battle in Buffalo. Locked On Bengals goes over the highlights for us post-game.
It was a dominant display for the Cincinnati Bengals in the divisional round in Buffalo. I'm Jake Lisco from the Locked On Bengals podcast, and the Bengals controlled this football game. Didn't matter where it was played, in a snow globe in Buffalo from start to finish, getting out to a 14-0 lead with the offense looking absolutely unstoppable early. Joe Burrow on point, escaping the pressure when it was there, but the offensive line with 3 backups did a pretty good job overall, and the run game was a massive factor in this one. You got to credit those guys on the offensive line for stepping up, credit both running backs for playing well as well throughout the game, both early and late in the second half to close the game out. Meanwhile, the defense prevented Buffalo from getting anything going on offense. They pressured Josh Allen early and often throughout the game, got home frequently, and affected him as a passer much too much for Josh Allen to overcome the torrential pressure from the Cincinnati Bengals defense. In the running game, quarterback runs, a big topic leading into this game. The Bills' running game in general didn't do anything until it was far too late. The Bengals dominate their way to an AFC Championship rematch in Kansas City next week.
That will do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Make sure that you are subscribed to Locked On NFL and your favorite team's Locked On podcast, especially now that we're within the postseason. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.